Hi everybody, my name is Ken Lindblom and I'm an Associate Professor of English at Stony Brook University. I'm going to talk to you about how I read an academic article. Uh, there are different ways to read different kinds of texts, and many of us were taught in our younger years to read anything as if it's a story right from the beginning to the end. And actually there are lots of other ways to read, and informational text in particular should be read differently. And academic writing, which is especially sophisticated informational text, can be read very differently and in much more useful ways. So when I approach an article such as this one, called Critical Thinking from Buzzword to Action, uh, I do the following. So this is an unusually dynamic piece of academic writing. Usually there isn't color and there isn't pictures and that, but here we go. So the first thing I do is I read the title. I also take a look at the subtitle, which there often is one, and I look at the authors. If this is a field in which I'm an expert, I may well know the authors, or I may know the schools that they're from, and that might help me get a sense of the direction and the background that the article might take. Then I skip all the way to the end of the article, and I look to see if there are any references or works cited, and if they are, what they are. So here are a few references. The fact that there are only a few tells me something about the intent of the article and the depth of it. The length of it also gives me some information about it. And here are some authors of the bio. So again, if I know this field, this is something I may know about. I also make sure I check the date to see how recent the article is, at what point in the conversation the information here might be intervening in a national discussion. Then I go back to the beginning again. And at this point, I look through the entire article. Okay? I may well read an abstract. This may or may not be an abstract, right? Because this could just be the opening paragraph. It's not easy to tell. In other informational texts, often it's easy to tell. I'll take a look at the pictures, if there are any. Often there are charts and graphs rather than pictures, and I'll look at the captions of those. I also look very closely at the subtitles. This will give me a sense of the shape of the article and the argument that's about to get made. See, so here, putting it into practice, I know that this section is going to be about classroom practices, which probably means the earlier parts are more theoretical, explaining the practice. And that's useful to know. It ends here, right? It's not much of a conclusion, so it's probably a fairly simple conclusion at the end. And this is very interesting here to me to see that there are actual student examples of whatever they're talking about being presented. So to me, that's very promising. And I would look again at the captions of these to see what's there. Okay, now that I have a sense of the article shape, where it's going, what it's going to do, now I begin actually reading through the article. I pay particular attention to things like bulleted lists, and you'll see I've already read this, so I did some highlighting. This is a particular definition of critical thinking, and I'll read through. Also, when I look at the references, I also look to see who the references are and what argument they might be used to support or flout. You never know if the references are being used as a foil or as support. Well, you eventually know after you've read the article, so that's helpful to know. If this is if this is a field in which I'm very familiar, I may well know these works, but in other cases I may not. So this is elementary education, which is actually something I know very little about. My expertise is in secondary and college level education. So these aren't articles that I know. And so that in this case didn't help very much, but the titles and the years can help. You see that these are fairly recent, so that gives you a sense. So now I've read the entire article, I've read the different pieces, and at this point I might go back again, and that's when I start doing the highlighting. Now I feel I have a good sense of the article. If this is something I'm using deliberately for a particular scholarly purpose, I may read it several more times, or if I'm reading it just to get a general sense of the article, now I feel like I've been done. So that gives you a good sense of how I approach an academic article. And I hope you understand that that also means there are a number of different ways to read. Often it entails going back and forth, and there's no wrong way to read an article. Don't feel like you have to just start at the beginning and go right to the end. Better readers apply very different strategies to informational texts. Hope that's helpful. Thanks.